Hello, welcome to episode 17 of the Intern's Oddities from around the world. Today, we'll be continuing our Internet Mysteries series with the Sudbrink calls. So, it starts off a little strange. Do it's about these two brothers, Stephen and Gary Sudbrink. Now, Stephen Sudbrink is getting married. And so he's going around and he's getting married. He's on his way to the the wedding, and he sees his brother Gary driving down the street when he looks over, and he looks at him and he's like he's just staring at him. He's not even looking at the road. His brother is just staring at him as he's driving. And they continue for a while, and eventually he's like, "What are you doing?" And his brother won't answer him. He just keeps staring at him. And eventually he speeds up and drives off. So he's like, "Okay, that's a little bit weird." And, you know, then that was one thing. And when he got to the wedding, he asked his brother about it, and his brother denied it. And he's just like, "No, I didn't do that. I'm, I'm fine. I flew in yesterday on a plane." And so, you know, he's just like, "Okay, I guess my brother Steven is just messing with me." You know, that that had to be him. I'm sure of it. I'm sure it was him. He's just playing some weird prank on me, right? So anyways, skip ahead a little bit. And one night Gary is back at his house when he gets a strange phone call. And if you want specifics, to be specific, it is the evening of February 8th, 1993. And Gary Sudbrink was 27 years old at the time. And he gets a strange call when he's at his parents' home in Long Island, New York. Late that evening, Gary's parents would receive a series of strange phone calls addressed directly to Gary. The caller on the other end spoke in a strange mechanical voice and made a number of weird statements alluding to Gary being impersonated by someone else. So let's go down a little bit, okay? So the first call. The call seems to be a bit harder to make out because of the low volume. So we're going to go through bits of it, and they had to cut out bits of, white noise audio to try and, piece it together. And here's how the call goes. "How long are you going to be back from Texas?" And he's like, "What? I'm not. I'll be back to Texas eventually. I'm not going to answer that. I'm not going to tell you exactly what day I'm going to be back." And then it's like, "Is this Gary Sudbrink?" He's like, "Yes, this is Gary. How long are you going to be back from Texas?" He's like, "I'm not going to answer that. I already told you." And it seems to be the voice seems to be going on a loop. And then they ask in one of the stranger moments of the call, "Who is this?" Here, though, is where it gets truly odd. The caller, in their low, mechanical, almost Buffalo Bill sounding voice, says, "Keep an eye on the skies." What do you mean, keep an eye on the skies? "Near Orion." When? Tonight? When do you want me to keep an eye on the skies? "The full moon." The caller repeats these lines a few times before Gary's dad jumps on the line. Seeming to be a believer in the paranormal or extraterrestrial, Gary's dad inquires about certain lines that the caller says, particularly when they say "near Orion." His father's intrigue possibly fuels Gary throughout the call, so that's something to keep in mind. Approximately half an hour later, while Gary and his parents were discussing the two phone calls they'd already received, their phone rang yet again. This time, the caller seemed to take a while to begin actually making any noise, and seemed quieter than ever, so they listened closely. Also, at the beginning, Gary's father makes mention of a Brian. That's just an erroneous mistaken the moment as Brian is Gary's other brother. And at first they think that it's a prank. They think Steven is playing some sort of prank on them. But then his father over here, he believes that it's an alien from outer space because he has been abducted by aliens before, and he believes that this might be an alien telling them about some sort of UFO that will appear in the sky under the next full moon. So then they get another phone call, and it's the same stuff. It just keeps saying, "Is Gary Sudbrink there? Is this Gary Sudbrink?" And then they repeat some of the phrases from the prior two phone calls. "Are you back from Texas? Keep an eye on the skies. Orion, the full moon. It will show double from you." As you heard, Gary's father was intrigued by the call throughout the process and seeming to believe that his son and he were communicating with an extraterrestrial, someone he refers to a few times as an intergalactic person. He also references a prior experiences he'd had in West Virginia, which I can only presume might have been tangentially related to the phenomenon surrounding Point Pleasant in the mid-1960s. The third call, which came at approximately 11:38 p.m., would prove to be the Sudbrink's final phone call from the mysterious individual on the evening of February 8, 1993. However, it would not be the last phone call they'd receive from this unknown persons. That would come the next night, February 9th, and would prove to be the weirdest phone call yet. Now, this is where it gets even more weird and more evidence that points to some sort of alien, if it's not a prank. If it's not a prank. So the following night, Tuesday, February 9th, 1993, Gary Sudbrink was still with his parents. They had been unable to talk about much without reverting back to the series of strange phone calls they'd received the night prior. That evening, Gary's uncle Tom had also come to visit. He was still there when the family's phone rang just before 10:30 p.m., and you'll hear him pop in for a moment in the recorded conversation that followed. The phone call, the longest of the bunch, features some of the strangest comments and questions yet from the mysterious individual on the other end of the line. First, the caller begins by saying some similar statements to those from the night before. "Is Gary Sudbrink there?" "Yes, this is Gary." "Is this Gary Sudbrink?" "Yes, I am Gary. You're talking to him." "Gary Sudbrink." But then the caller starts veering into new territory, things that are extraterrestrial in nature. "We come to be within this planet." "What do you mean, in this planet?" "We come to be within this planet, to visit the many, to be contacted as the same with you." The final line they repeated at least once. As soon as Gary's uncle pops on the line, the caller then changes the scripts and enters some eerie Men in Black territory. "Beware government interference. Beware government interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them." Then, towards the end of the call, with their voice being surrounded by static and some distorted background noise, the caller then plays some of the greatest hits thus far. "Appears the sun will rise on the dark side of the moon. Then the world will know. On the moon she'll double from you. Beware government interference, visitations to be disrupted by them." Now, over the years, audio from these phone calls has been used in various forums, conferences, panels, or even shows discussing UFOs or UAPs to make inferences to the caller being extraterrestrial in nature, as his father had said earlier. As you heard in the call itself, Gary's father and his uncle seemed to be believers, with his father making mention of the caller being an intergalactic person at times, even seeming to press the issue when Gary was skeptical. But the reason that I bring all of this up is that there is some context I haven't given quite yet. If you recall, at the beginning of this episode, I told you that the first call was preceded by Gary talking to his friend Mike. Mike told Gary that the day before he had received a similar call from someone that sounded just like Gary, coming to have to come visit family. However, in this call, this individual, calling himself Gary, claimed to have flown in through an incorrect airport and was sick, so he wasn't able to hang out. None of this was true, other than Gary coming back home to visit family, of course, but Gary had no explanation for this discrepancy. He hadn't told any of his friends or family that he was coming back to visit before he did so. And also, when he was at the airport, he did have a stranger come up to him and ask him for his name and and when he gave his name as Gary, they started to push him for his last name, but he wasn't comfortable giving his last name, obviously, to some random person at the airport. So he wasn't comfortable telling his last name. So he got lucky and they called his flight, and he didn't really think much more about it at the time. So this is when, about a year previously, that's when we were talking about the car and the weird car at the beginning. So back during the first phone call, when you hear Gary mention Steven and thinks he's pulling a prank on him, he thinks it's related to the incident where the car was driving. The strange encounter from a year earlier, paired with his call to his friend Mike, made Gary question the content of the phone calls entirely. In the years since, it's led way to the theory that Gary might have had a strange doppelganger of sorts, especially when you factor in some of the quotes made by the mysterious caller, such as, "show double of you," and "you're being impersonated by the other voice." To give even more ammunition to those that think the story has some paranormal or extraterrestrial link, while Gary was at the airport in Texas getting ready to fly home, he was approached by the man with the clipboard, who I mentioned a moment ago. And then after he boarded his flight, the dude with the clipboard sat down next to him, started asking him similar questions. Gary asked this guy to leave him alone, and moments later was seemingly rescued by a stewardess who told the man with the clipboard that he wasn't sitting in his assigned seat. However, the guy moved to the seat behind Gary and continued to pester him for a few more minutes before eventually being shooed away. Gary wouldn't see this man for the rest of the flight, nor when they were disembarking the plane, yet he felt perturbed enough by the encounter to call his landlord to keep an eye on his apartment while he was on Long Island. If we take the theory that this was some sort of extraterrestrial link at face value, we can only assume that a doppelganger of sorts was attempting to live in Gary's shoes for a brief time. For what reason, we can only guess at. However, if this were true, a large assumption to make, I understand, then maybe the mysterious creepy sounding caller was attempting to call Gary to warn him of this imposter. To this day, it remains unknown exactly what these strange phone calls were. If they were legitimate paranormal or if they were a prank or hoax of some sort, nobody knows. So, you get to make up your own mind, I suppose. But I have presented the information, and, you know, he never really, he never went out of his way to seek notoriety or fame. He never wrote a book about it, and he didn't even mention any of these phone calls for many, many years until he was at a UFO convention, and he just happened to bring them up to one of the people at the convention who, brought them to the attention of the public, but that's about it. So I thought this was pretty interesting because, even if it was, a prank, like what was the purpose of the prank? And his brother swears up and down that it wasn't him. So if it wasn't his brother, then who else would have bothered to play a prank on him like that? And for what purpose? So that's up for you to decide. Let us know what you think. We will see you next time on This Uncanny Earth. Thank you for coming to hang out. And remember,